Hi, everybody. Welcome to the live stream. What a day. Once again, I have to say, what a day. Today at the Alex Murdaugh trial, we had the angry best friend. We had the furious bank. We had the betrayed housekeeper's son who alleges Alex Murdaugh stole millions from him. And today, I'm not even making this up, one of today's witnesses gave $1,000 to another witness to thank her for her testimony against Alex Murdaugh. So Bridie Murphy Michelle, yes, you are going to get an answer to your question. What do I think about that? We'll get to that in order. So it came last, but wow. I've also expanded our timeline to include some new testimony that we had today. I'm going to be putting it on Twitter, so be sure to follow me over at Lawyer Lee W. And I'm going to be posting that timeline on Twitter and updating it throughout the trial as we get more information in. I don't know why the the prosecution and the defense are not putting a timeline up for the jury, but I need one. So I'm going to be making one and sharing it with you. Be sure, if you would, to like this video. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe. You don't want to miss a day of this trial. So I'll be back tomorrow night at 7, and you definitely want to be here. We started off with cross from Dwight Falkofske, on cross-examination. He works with the FBI and got data from Alex Murdaugh's car from the night of the murders. The cross by the defense seems sort of random here. They talked about things like it took a year to come up with a way to get this data and to reverse engineer it and write a program in order to get it out, and asked again, the cross did you ask the auto manufacturer for help? And the answer was no, didn't ask the auto manufacturer for help. Also, the cross pointed out that not everything was reflected, that some things either were incorrect, missing. For example, there's no location data. And also there are endpoints where they even mentioned, okay, the car is out of park, but there's no setting for it going back in. We can't find that. So obviously the car isn't still rolling around somewhere, and therefore there was a problem with that. My guess is that the reason it was so scattered is that it's going to connect up with a defense expert. So they were just pulling out the nuggets that they need to lay the groundwork for that defense expert to talk. It actually would be very hilarious if they brought in a defense expert who just asked the auto manufacturer for the key and got one. I doubt they could get that, but I did think of that when there was, again, the second request about, why didn't you ask the auto manufacturer for the key to be able to download this data? The next witness was some of the most emotional testimony that we've seen was Chris Wilson. He would probably be a better way to put it, Alex Murdaugh's best friend. Law school roommates, they have been friends for years and years. Their families were very close. In fact, their wives have been sorority sisters and gotten even closer to each other once Alex and Chris married them and were already really close friends. Alex and Chris had worked 25 to 30 plaintiffs' cases together. And Chris said Alex was at a big firm. He had a big reputation. I thought he made a lot more money than I did. He was a big shot, in other words. Then it came to the Ferris v. Matt Trucks case. That was a case they tried to a judge in early 2021. The fee, they got a pair of verdicts that added up to $5.5 million. $791,000 of a fee went to Chris Wilson, and then $792,000 in fee was supposed to go to Alex Murdaugh's firm. But Chris Wilson said that Alex, his buddy, his close personal friend, came to him and said, look, instead of writing the check to my firm, as you would normally do, I'm concerned about my exposure in the boat case. And I'll explain that in just a minute. And so I'm concerned about that. I'd really like you to put that into an annuity. sorry, I'm going to put that into an annuity, and I need you to pay it directly to me instead of to the firm so I can put it into this annuity. I've cleared it with my firm. This is Alec talking. It's going to be on the books. It's going to be accounted for within the firm. And Chris Wilson said he had the authority to do that as a partner. And that's true. He did have the authority, at least the apparent authority, to do that on behalf of his law firm, being a partner. So on March 10th, Alex texted Chris, I need to get that check today. And it had been long enough. It had been in the required amount of time. So that day, Chris Wilson cut checks to Alex Murdaugh. Now, he wrote 2 fee checks and made them both out to Alex Murdaugh personally, Richard Alexander Murdaugh, instead of to the firm, which he normally would have done. $600,000 was for the husband's case, and $192,000 was for the wife's case. I mentioned there were 2 cases. Now, Alec had somebody pick up the checks, but then he had Chris void out that $600,000 check and make it into 2 separate checks. Alec said, well, I'm funding 3 separate annuities. So I need $192,000. And then if you would take that $600,000 check and divide it into 2 others, $225,000 and $375,000, that would help me. If you would please divide them out. We don't know why he did that. I don't know if we're going to get information about that, if there was some reason behind that, but he wanted 3 separate checks. Maybe it was to keep it under a certain threshold. That $225,000 check is the one that caused the fall of the house of Murdaugh, because that is the very check that came floating down to the floor, according to Annette Griswold, the paralegal. She says she was in his office looking for a file. She picks up the file, and this check comes fluttering down. She picks it up and realizes that Alex Murdaugh has been lying to her. He's been telling her he never received a check personally, as Chris Wilson's firm is saying. And yet here the check is. He's endorsed it on the back, and it's been deposited. So, and to sort of give you just a little quick background on how this whole situation works, a personal injury case, the lawyer gets the entire amount of money from the defendant, and that lawyer gets paid a percentage of that. So the lawyer puts it into a trust account because it doesn't all belong to the lawyer, and then pays the client and pays his own fee, and then also pays expenses. In most cases, the plaintiff's attorney will front those expenses, and then they'll come out of the plaintiff's amount on the back end. But the plaintiff doesn't have to reimburse them if the plaintiff doesn't win. That's how it typically works. So that's why on May 13th, even though the attorney's fee checks had already been written, this time Chris Wilson mailed the expense checks to Alex Murdaugh's law firm. And that was supposed to cover all the expenses from the case that they had paid. And it was probably pretty significant. This was a case that involved product liability, and their experts and so forth paid out of the law firm account. This causes a lot of confusion because Annette Griswold, Alex Murdaugh's paralegal, says, wait a minute, here are expense checks, but there are no attorney's fees checks. They've forgotten to pay us that. She contacts Chris Wilson's firm, talks to the paralegal, Vicky, and then it kind of begins this round dance because Vicky tells her, oh, your boss has already been paid. She goes to Alex, and Alex says, oh, it's still in the trust account. And she goes even to the COO, CFO of the law firm, and the COO says, well, I don't have such a check. They go round and round, and they're trying to figure out, where is this money? And Annette Griswold says initially she figures that her boss lost the check, and that's what the problem is. Right about May 27th, Jeannie Seckinger sends an email that goes to Annette, and who then follows through with Chris Wilson's firm, saying, look, the expense checks that we got don't match our costs. That means we spent more in expenses. You should have reimbursed us more. Then a partner at Alex Murdaugh's firm, Lee Cope, talks to Chris Wilson and said, have you finished disbursing the Ferris case? Now, this is a big fee, right? $792,000. And Chris says, no, we haven't. According to Chris Wilson, They were talking probably about two different things. Lee Cope may have been asking, have you dispersed at all? Have you paid fees? Have you paid expenses? Have you done anything? Chris Wilson hears, have you finished dispersing? And the answer to that was no, because in fact, there was still money in the account to cover liens. So it was not too late if they didn't get enough on their expenses. They still had time. And so that's what he thought he was answering. So he said, no, I haven't dispersed at all. He talks to Alec and says, you know, you can put through more expenses. And he says, he also said to Alex, now, this is the case. I wrote the check directly to you. Is everything all right? And Alex says, oh yeah, I just need to make sure my partners know that this is the case where I'm going to be doing that, where I'm going to be putting the money into an annuity. They just need to know it's that case. And so in Chris's mind, he said he put this out of his mind. It didn't seem important. It was over and done with. They had enough money to cover whatever was needed. No problems. That's important because of the issue of whether or not there was, in June, Alex Murdaugh had this idea that the entire world financially was crumbling around him. That's what the prosecution says was his motive. So now I want to get into some testimony that Chris Wilson gave, and I want to fit it into the timeline that we talked about yesterday. So let me head over to that. Here we go. All right, so here's our timeline, and I've added in some of the things that Chris Wilson said. So you may remember that Alex Murdaugh said that he was not there at the time of the murders. He had gone to his mother's house to visit her and came back. So yesterday we looked at sort of how that matched up with what the witness said about the car. That was the witness we heard about first thing this morning, who finished up his testimony on cross. And he talked about what he had found when he looked at the infotainment system, when he looked at the OnStar system inside Alex Murdaugh's vehicle. So here's what we found out from Chris Wilson. And remember that the prosecution has suggested that Alex Murdaugh only went to his mother's house because he had just killed his wife and son and he needed to create an alibi. He wanted to make sure that people didn't know he was there. So he left the scene and then came back later, and he made phone calls along the way to sort of beef up his excuse for why he had an alibi, to beef up his alibi. So here's what Chris Wilson said. He said, okay, Alex Murdaugh called me at 9:11. And Chris Wilson was in the middle of trying to fix the pool pump, and he said, I can't talk right now. He said Alex's demeanor was ordinary. Then at 9:20, Chris called Alex back. Alex said he was about to get to his mom's house. Now, that's exactly what it looked like from the data taken from the car. It looked like he was driving to his mom's house right at that time. So Alex says he's about to get to his mom's house. They talk for 3 minutes, and then we see Alex arrive at his mom's house based on the car data. So then Alex stays at his mom's house until 9:44, and then he texts Chris Wilson while he was driving, shame on Alex, saying, call me if you're up. So at 9:52, Chris then does call Alex, but Alex doesn't answer. Chris says that happens all the time. I just call back. So at 9:53, he calls again, and they talk for 2 to 3 minutes. Alex says he's about to arrive home. Well, that's exactly what's shown on the car data. Alex says he's about to arrive home. Can we talk tomorrow? Because of the fact that there's bad cell service right around the Moselle area. Again, Alex's demeanor is ordinary. And from that point on, the next conversation between Chris Wilson and Alex is after the murders occur. So let me go ahead and pull that off, and then we'll get back to the day's testimony. So remember, the prosecution's theory here is that Alex Murdaugh kills 2 of the 3 people closest to him, and with ice blood in his veins, doesn't show it at all. His best friend has no idea he has just murdered 2 people. They're talking normally. Then after the police are called, he goes into hysteria and keeps that act up for 3 months. As you will hear, witness after witness talks about how distraught Alex Murdaugh was following the murders. So this makes the prosecution's theory, I thought, more difficult to prove. So Chris talked about going to Moselle that night. As soon as he heard about the murders, he said, I was worried he was going to kill himself. And he thought a lot of people were worried for Alec about that. He said the Ferris fees issue did not resurface again until July. So this is June 7th, the murders, and it's not until July. At that point, Alec calls him and says, look, I wasn't able to put the money into annuities like I thought I was going to be able to do. So I'm just going to send you the money back. If you would just start over, disperse everything straight to my firm. And Chris says, okay. And Alex sends him checks, one for $350,000 and one for $250,000. So a total of $600,000, not the $792,000 that he initially got. Alec told Chris, I've already put $192,000 away. It's not available. I would have to pay penalties and costs, and it would, so I'll get it to you. I'll get it to you real soon. And he asked Chris, would you just send an email to the firm telling them that you're holding this all in trust, and I'll get you the 192. So Chris Wilson says, well, at that point, he couldn't send that email to the PMPED law firm, Alex law firm, unless he'd actually put $192,000 into the trust. So he says, so I put my own money into the trust for that $192,000, waiting for Alec to pay me back, thinking it would happen at any time. So then he says he followed up with that. He asked about the $192,000. He asked in August, and Alex Murdaugh tells him, well, that was tied up in the annuity. He asked for it again in mid-August, says, and actually has him fill out a form, says to him, look, I hate to do this. This is awkward, but, if something happened to you, if you were to die, I couldn't get repaid unless we put this in writing, because I would just be saying you owe me this money and no one would believe it. So I need you to write this down. And Alec handwrote in 3 sentences what this was. Now, there was a side discussion at this point about what was going to come next, which was drug use and rehab. And the judge said, look, it's already in. And the defense helped by putting in the entire memo or letter, I guess it was, letter that was written to the paralegal by Alex. So it's in. So he went next to say that Lee Cope called him. Lee Cope, remember, was Alex Murdaugh's partner, called him on September 3rd and said, Alex Murdaugh has been stealing from our firm. Asked him whether he had money in the trust account. And he said, yes, I do. And then Lee Cope said, well, hang on. We're going to do a press release next week. So just hang on. So on September 4th, that next day, he goes up to see Alex. He says he's very angry because he's been used. Not to mention there was $192,000 that was taken from him that he's put in personally. Now, I'm not totally sure he had to put in that $192,000 personally. I was a little confused about why he did that, because he had already paid the money. And I think he was right that Alex Murdaugh had apparent authority to say the law firm agreed to this and we want you to write the check this way. I thought that was kind of reasonable. So I don't know why he felt like he personally had to put in $192,000. I don't know if there's more to the story or if he's just a very moral person or what exactly was happening. But he felt like he personally had to put in the $192,000. And he did have to do that before he said, I've got it all here. He either had to tell the firm, I've only got $600,000, or he had to add his own money if he wanted to say he had $792,000. So he may have been doing it to help his buddy out. So on this Saturday morning meeting, when he goes to see Alex, out of the blue, not something that they had planned earlier, he says, Alex tells him, I have a drug problem. I have been addicted to opiates for 20 years, and I admit I stole this money. This is the quote, I shit you up. I'm sorry. I shit a lot of people up. That was his statement. And Chris Wilson says, I couldn't believe it. I mean, I couldn't believe I never suspected it. Drugs, money, I never suspected any of that. And he said, and Alex said, well, it's been a long time and I'm good at covering it up. Chris Wilson said he felt very angry and he never got the $192,000 back. One thing I wondered about, you saw that letter from rehab that was written by Alec to Annette Griswold and Christy, one of his other assistants. I just wondered why Alec didn't write to Chris Wilson, because Chris said he'd only gotten 2 communications, neither of which was the sort of deep personal apology letter that Alec wrote to the paralegal. I was just curious, throwing that in. So on cross-examination, they went straight for the main point, which was as of June 7th, Chris Wilson had no clue that there was a problem with the Ferris fee. That's really important because that's what the motive was. The motive and the reason for admitting the testimony is the theory that Alec believed the financial world was crumbling around him. So much so that he thought the only way to distract everybody was to kill his wife and son. Chris Wilson said that at no point in June or July was he thinking Alex Murdaugh had any involvement in these murders, and that Alex said he was going to get cash from his dad's estate from life insurance. He wasn't desperate for cash, or didn't seem to be. That Alec never mentioned any kind of life insurance for Maggie or Paul. And interestingly, that Alec never really went to stay at Moselle again. Now, he said he didn't know for sure, but what he knew that was that instead he stayed with his brother or with Maggie's parents, but he just didn't seem to want to go to Moselle. The defense then had sort of a fine line to walk here, because on the one hand, they need the opiate addiction to explain all of the stealing. But on the other hand, they can't have Alex Murdaugh be, a crazed drug dealer person who runs around and stabs people. So what they said was that they asked him, did you ever see a change in Alec? If he was addicted to opiates for 20 years, did you ever see him act differently? And he said, no, he was always capable of handling his work, never saw him lose it. He also talked a lot about what a family guy Alex Murdaugh was, that he always took a call. If Maggie or Paul called, he answered, or Buster, and that he preferred family trips, not guy trips. Maggie came up for the Ferris trial in February, I think it was, of 2021. Maggie and Alec had season tickets together to football and basketball games, and that Alec had a great relationship with Maggie's family. He even talked about the last 2 weekends, they had dinner over Memorial Day weekend with Alec and Maggie, and everybody seemed happy. And then on Saturday, June 5th, he and his wife went to baseball regionals with Maggie and Alec and Buster and his girlfriend. So all of that was to show that Alec had a good relationship with his wife and would not have killed her. That was what the defense was trying to show. He also said that call on June 7th, while Alec was in the car, was something they really would normally talk about, not just creating an alibi. So be sure to, while I'm thinking about it, be sure to like the video if you would, and subscribe to come back for more. All right, now let's move into the final part of the cross on Chris Wilson, because the defense then said, didn't you tell the state grand jury that Alec was in no state of mind to talk to SLED? And Alec, there was a surprising amount of tussle over that. They had to actually show him the transcript as if he didn't want to admit that. But he finally just said, well, okay, I did say that. And Alec really was not in a good state of mind. And afterwards was losing weight, not sleeping, not eating, said he didn't know what he would do without Maggie or Paul, and could not stay at Moselle anymore. So all of those things were related to Alec as not being the person who could commit the murders. And then we moved into a very interesting argument on Michael Tony Satterfield. Now, Tony Satterfield was a client of Alex Murdaugh's, and I'll explain all of this, but the defense wanted to keep his testimony out entirely. And they said, look, this is not just financial. This is the victim of one of the crimes. It's you've got enough. You've got financial in. So just leave it be, you know, give him a break. And give Alex Murdaugh a break, and don't let Tony Satterfield in at all. They also made a really good argument that I thought that the phone records showed there was a call between Tony Satterfield and Alex Murdaugh, but not until June 22nd. So it didn't really relate to the crime itself, which happened on June 7th, earlier than that. So here's what the judge ruled, said, look, this case dwarfs every other one in terms of the amount. And if he really was seeking to divert attention, this is the case to divert attention from. So I'm going to let this in. And the young man said he didn't really know when they had talked, so I'm going to let it in. Tony Satterfield then got on the stand. Now, Tony Satterfield was the son of Gloria Satterfield. She passed in February 2018 because she tripped and fell down the stairs at Moselle. At least that's what Alex said that she tripped over their dogs and fell down the stairs. She had worked for the Murdaughs for 20 years. She'd done everything from house cleaning to babysitting, 20 years with their family. And Alex Murdaugh said to Tony, look, I've got insurance coverage. I've got $505,000. I'm going to see if I can get the medical bills covered and see if I can get $100,000 for you and $100,000 for your brother. The brother is apparently disabled, and Tony acts for him. Tony said, I viewed Alex as my lawyer. Alex was the one who had the idea for the case. He's the one I knew. Now, at some point, Alex Murdaugh actually brought in Corey Fleming to represent Tony Satterfield, saying, look, I kind of have a conflict because you're suing me. You're having to sue me for my insurance policy. So I'm going to have Corey represent you. Now, Corey has also been indicted for his role in this. There was also a stage at which, when they got money in for Tony Satterfield, unbeknownst to Tony Satterfield, they appointed, at Alex's request, Chad Westendorf, a vice president at Palmetto State Bank, to be the personal rep for Tony. And Tony signed over his rights to Chad to control all the money. Now, Alex did not, and this is probably the most important point of the testimony, Alex did not say that he had already collected the $505,000, and he never ever mentioned that there was also a $5 million umbrella policy, and ultimately Alex and Corey Fleming got $4.3 million for Gloria Satterfield's death. Satterfield, however, got nada, not a dime, he testified. And every time he talked to Alex, Alex would say, oh yeah, working on that, kind of coming along, hope I can get you $100,000. So in June of 2021, and the date wasn't totally clear, Tony heard media reports that there had already been a settlement in his mother's case. So on approximately June 22nd, he called Alex, and Alex said nothing about a settlement, nothing about that at all. And he never got money, just said they were working on the case. Once again, working on the case. Ultimately, Alex Murdaugh has confessed judgment. That means admitted what he did and confessed that he owes the money. Doesn't have the money, but owes the money. Now, Satterfield said the reason he was willing to go after the insurance policy and go along with what Alex said is because I trusted him. And that's why it was such damaging testimony for Alex Murdaugh, because for obvious reasons, Alex had known Tony Satterfield for 20 years, and his mother had worked for Alex for 20 years. Good reason to trust him. Now, on cross, there was a whole lot of sort of confusion in the testimony, but ultimately, Tony Satterfield appeared to confirm that his attorney collected $6 million for him from other people, not Alex Murdaugh, but in addition to the $4.3 million confession of judgment from Alec, other parties paid him $6 million. And the defense point was, look, you're whole, right? You got what you got everything you wanted or should have gotten. I don't know that that was the most effective cross, but that was the cross. We then heard from Jan Malinowski. He's the CEO of Palmetto State Bank. We heard from him outside the presence of the jury earlier, but this was something the jury got to hear for the first time. He is now the CEO of Palmetto State Bank. He came after Russell Laffitte, who has been convicted of felonies related to all of the things we're talking about here. Jan Malinowski testified about sort of one series of incidents. On August 9th, a board member wrote to the board, the rest of the board, and said, look, I'd like an accounting of what Murdaugh's loans are and his account balances with the bank. Well, at that moment in time, Alex Murdaugh was $367,000 overdrawn from his checking account. So the CEO of the time, Russell Laffitte, deposited $400,000 into Murdaugh's checking account. Bam, no overdraft. And they only charged him $5 for his overdraft. That is a great bank to bank with. If you ever overdraft, they just put the money into your account for you, and they only charge you $5. This is the bank, right? Russell Laffitte then created and backdated paperwork for a $750,000 loan that supposedly was made in July. Now, why bother to backdate it? And why $750 instead of the $400 that went into the Alex checking account to cover the overdraft? Why all that? Well, the answer is because remember that $350,000 payment to Chris Wilson, one of the two payments that came in to add up to $600,000 to cover part of the Ferris case? Remember when he was paying that back to Chris Wilson so Chris Wilson could pay the PMPED law firm? That check was now part of this loan that supposedly had occurred in July because the bank had simply sent the money to Chris Wilson. Their initial excuse was, oh, this is beach house renovations. That didn't really work because the beach house already had a mortgage on it. And through a long series of discussions, the bottom line is Alec had $4.2 million in secured and unsecured loans from the bank. Some of them were in default and have been for so long, the bank had even written them off. So the cross of this, they had to pretty much just let it go. All they said was, well, as of June, we don't really have anything to say about this financial crime, but as of June, when the murders occurred, he walked into Palmetto State Bank and gotten a loan, right? Right? He could have done that. And the answer was, yeah, in June, yeah, he could have. Now we get to the final situation of the day. The defense moved to exclude the testimony of Mark Tinsley. So I'll give you just a quick view. Mark Tinsley represented the Beach family in the boat crash case. Okay, what's the boat crash case? Who are the Beach family? The Paul Murdaugh, one of the two people murdered, and the son of Alec, was in a boat crash where he was accused of boating under the influence, and a young girl was killed. 19-year-old Mallory Beach was killed. So her family, there were criminal proceedings against Paul, and also her family was suing the Murdaughs because of the wreck. Mark Tinsley represents Mallory Beach. So the defense comes in before his testimony and says, we want to exclude his testimony because he gave, just now in the middle of trial, $1,000 to a GoFundMe for Shelley Smith. Now, who is Shelley Smith? She, you will recall, is the caregiver for Alex Murdaugh's mother, who testified at trial a few days ago. And the reward, the GoFundMe, was as a reward for her honesty testifying. So in the middle of trial, a witness, a lawyer witness, gave money to another witness for testifying. And for testifying, against Alex Murdaugh, which clearly calls into question the bias of this particular witness. Now, apparently this GoFundMe was set up by someone claiming to be the daughter of Shelley Smith. And so far, $7,800 was collected toward the $20,000 goal. How did they find out Mark Tinsley gave the money? I don't know. But Judge Newman, and I do not blame him for this at all. Judge Newman said, I'm going to let this in. This sounds like really good fodder for Cross. I'll say, I mean, that's incredible. What kind of bias would you have to pay witnesses that testified the way you thought they should? That's what the cross will be. You paid money to this witness because she helped you in the Mallory Beach case. You paid money to this witness in the middle of trial because you agreed with her testimony. Isn't that true? It's going to be absolutely great cross. So I don't blame Judge Newman for wanting to see that in the trial. I have to agree with that. Now, we aren't there yet. Right now, Mark Tinsley has testified about the boat crash that there was a $500,000 policy because by now that $5 million umbrella policy was no longer available to Alec. And that wasn't enough to cover 2 people injured and his family whose daughter was killed. He said Alec knew that Paul Murdaugh had a propensity to drink, and Mark Tinsley had even managed to get videos from Paul's girlfriend that showed Paul drinking underage and very drunk. He said he told Alex's attorney multiple times that he would be suing Murdaugh personally, and Murdaugh was going to have to pay a lot of money. He said he decided to go after Murdaugh personally for $10 million. And Murdaugh's lawyer said he doesn't have that. He could maybe get you $1 million. And Tinsley offered a payment plan or offered to let Alex Murdaugh hand over his houses, like Moselle, like Edisto, their beach house. And then Tinsley filed a motion to compel Murdaugh to turn over the finances and said, look, I want to see that you really can't pay. You claim you can't. I want to see that. Tinsley, that's part and parcel of the government's argument about the motive, that Alex Murdaugh was supposed to turn over something or at least have a hearing about whether he needed to turn over something on that Friday. The murders were on a Monday. They say he was trying to distract from all of this financial turmoil, and that's why he killed his wife and son. Now, we finally got a little information about how long the trial might go. The state said they're going to be going through midweek next week. The defense said they would need a week after that, and that they were flying in witnesses, out-of-state experts who would be coming in to testify. So they were trying to get timing right for those experts. It's absolutely incredible. I'm going to take a quick run through. Also, thank you. First of all, I see some people who are putting their question marks at the beginning. Thank you so much. That really helps me be able to find them. I'm thinking about doing an extra live on Saturday where I would just answer questions, because it seems like we never really have enough time to get to so many. So if that would be of interest to you, would you go ahead and put that in the chat? Like, yes, extra live would be, that'll tell me, yes, you would be interested in that and having some more Q&A, so to speak, on it. So I see Tom had a question. Let me see if I can find that again. I zipped past that. He was asking about exhuming the body. I don't know. I don't know if that's true or not. I had heard that rumor. That would certainly be interesting. Edisto. Did I say it wrong? Ed Disto. I think I said it right. I'm not sure. But thank you, Robin. I may have said that wrong. Let's see. Anything else? See, that's a part of it. I hate to go through so slowly to try to find the questions. So that's part of why I was thinking, let's do an extra live, and then you could get extra information about that. Well, I will. So I'm thinking about doing that. Be sure to put in the comments so I'll know. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe. We'll be back tomorrow night at 7. Do not miss a day of this trial. See you next time.